So today we're going to be talking about organizational barriers to talent mobility. And I have a special guest here, Heather MacDonald. Heather is a principal consultant for workforce transformation here at Pluralsight. Now, in this role, she collaborates with strategic level executives to address challenges that impede skill acquisition so that organizations can optimize their digital transformation and better align skill development with the organization's goals and objectives. Before joining Pluralsight, Heather was the VP of Strategy, Change, and Communications for Zion Bank Corporation's Enterprise Technology and Operations Division. So I'm really excited that she could be here today. Now, organizations say they want to create talent mobility, but what does that really mean? Like an internal job board, fast-tracking interviews for internal applicants, promoting from within, or is it something deeper? So today we're going to explore talent mobility, what it means, and identify and address common pitfalls so that you can make the most out of your talent mobility investments. So how are you doing today, Heather?
Doing so great, Jeremy. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, no problem. So today we're talking about talent mobility, and what does talent mobility mean to you when you hear that term?
Such a great question. Talent mobility to me is really the ability for people to move not only like just in a career ladder for their specific role, but it's also that internal mobility. It's the ability for, your frontline employees, your tellers, your cashiers, your call center folks, do they have the same opportunities to move up and move throughout your organization that somebody who's coming in with, a college degree or 5 years of experience or 20 years of experience, like, is there equal opportunity for mobility, whether it's within the career path that you've chosen for yourself, or whether it's across the organization, the ability to move in other places and expand your career horizons. So I think talent mobility can be, it's a lot of different things, but it really is, it's maximizing the potential that you have in your organization.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. Like right now, we know that out in tech, it is very hard to retain and keep tech people. That is a very, very difficult thing to do. So being able to keep people growing within your organization is super important. And so one of the things that I've noticed in my career is that folks who come from different backgrounds always have a lot to add. The people that kind of like woke up one day when they were a teenager and decided to become a software engineer and write software and go through this school and interning and all that, they're great. However, there are some times that people are like, oh, I started out answering the phones for this place 10 years ago, and now I'm a DBA. They seem to come up with some really creative decision-making, creative ideas, that come out of nowhere, to where non-traditional paths, I think, are very valuable. And it's something that companies should embrace for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, you miss out on so much if everybody has similar experiences, similar backgrounds. Like you get the same, you get a lot of the same. Like if you're just trying to maintain what is, maybe that's fine, but I can't imagine that there's any company out there that isn't going to need to continue to innovate, to continue to reinvent themselves, to become relevant or to stay relevant in their industry. And I think the beauty of having people who don't have that same background is you bring in that diversity of thought and the different contexts that people have. Like, no one person knows everything about everything and every situation and experience. So the way that you solve for that is if you bring people who come from different backgrounds, who have worked with different people, you get a better product at the end of the day. You solve for the right things. And I think you also help try to eliminate some of those gaps around, like, we all have these unconscious biases, these assumptions that we have based on how we grew up, what we watched in the media, the friends and the family that we have closest to us. And if you're not associating and connecting with people who are different from you, you have the potential to build something that actually could be problematic. It's like those early things when AI was first coming out and, people were like, oh, we're going to do this resume scanning thing that's just going to find us the best candidates. And all of a sudden, all of your best candidates are, mid-30s, white, male, whatever. It's like, well, yeah, but you trained the data using the old data, which happened to be biased. And it's like, what did you expect to happen? So we need more diversity at the table. We need more different people thinking about this from their lens and their experience to make sure that we're maximizing technology, but we're not doing it in a way that harms people at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you think are some good ways that you can kind of reduce bias in that process, like for hiring, for instance? What are some good ways that you've seen that you can reduce that bias a little bit, other than not using AI resume systems?
Don't use that, especially if it's like weird. No, I think it's part of it is making sure, like, check yourself. Like, are you looking for the same thing because it's what you're comfortable with, because it's what you know how to manage, and you know how to work? Like, I think a lot of people like use culture fits as a thing for sameness. Like, you've got to be really careful. Sometimes culture, like having the right culture is important, but also having people who bring different things to that culture is also a piece of that. If culture is being used as a blanket for, but I just want the same, so I'm just going to keep hiring people who are culture fit, that's problematic. So sometimes it is like, when you're hiring, like, are you asking questions that actually assess people based on the job criteria and the needs that the job has? Or are you just hiring the person who you have good rapport with, that happens to, have the same hobbies as you, or do the same things on the weekend, or they went to your school? Also checking yourself, like, yes, it's very easy to assume that if people have a similar background to yours, they will be successful, but then you miss out on people who might have adjacent skills if you're not asking the right questions to dig in and understand, like, do they have the core skills that will help them be successful? And I think we're starting to see in HR spaces, and more from a lot of the big management consulting firms, is it's about people's ability to learn and adapt. Like, you can teach people hard skills, especially on something like Pluralsight. You can give them access to the actual tactical training they need. You can't necessarily train somebody to be curious about their work, to ask good questions, to be a good collaborator, to dig into the organization and find the answers on their own. So it's like, are you even hiring for the right things through that process? And sometimes it is just being willing to say, like, I have biases. I need to check myself and make sure that, sometimes it's worth it to get a second opinion. Like, yes, you don't want to drag out a hiring process and have it be, death by interview. But sometimes bringing in someone else, if you're really like, if you're close on two people and you're worried that maybe I'm just picking someone because I like them better, get that second opinion so you can make sure you're not disqualifying somebody who's just a little bit different because of your personal preference.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we wanted to touch on in this is reward systems. And reward systems are basically in place to, of course, encourage people to move and be mobile and kind of climb the ladder, as they say. What are some pitfalls that you've seen with the traditional reward systems? I could probably do an entire webinar on bad reward systems. I'm sure you could too. But what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen with like traditional ways of rewarding folks?
Yeah, I think the thing that you miss on is the nuance of what makes people really great. Like, if you're using a system that just rewards productivity, then you're rewarding like the outputs of someone's work, not the outcomes. So there's that difference between, like, I can get a lot of work done. You can quantify how many emails I send, how many calls I have with clients, the time I'm spending, putting decks together or whatever, but that doesn't mean I'm actually driving the outcomes for my customers' success. That's a whole different thing. And sometimes that's a whole lot harder to quantify, especially if you're in a business where, your customers are giving you some level of feedback based on the product you've created and put out there. But it's not always the big picture. It's not always giving you all of the information to say, well, were you successful or not? I think sometimes if you stick to productivity measures, if you stick to only what's quantifiable, you miss the nuance, especially of people who are really great at promoting people into other roles, to developing people to their potential. Even sometimes it's good when managers can recognize somebody's not a good fit and can help them find something that is, whether it's in your org or outside of the org. Helping people have that space to come in and try something and leave with grace and respect into something that's a better fit for them. That safety and that ability to do so is something that's really important and should be acknowledged. But often, traditional those kind of management processes and kind of check the box exercises, they miss some of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I do like that. Focusing on outcomes is sometimes a little bit difficult. One of the analogies that I've used, like when we're talking about social media on our team, is, you can get 1 million views on a video, and that's great, and everyone's high-fiving each other. But if it's 1 million views of, 1 million people who looked at it and said, this is junk, it's nonsense, and close it, then that number means nothing, to where if you get 100 views on it and all 100 of those people got some value out of that, then that's more valuable than a million. So that is, I like how you put that, focusing on outcomes rather than, numbers, which of course it makes it really difficult to say, was this person successful? We promoted them into this position, and well, how many commits did they make to the code base? It's like, it doesn't really tell you anything. So, so focusing on what you're trying to gain from that, I think, is very important.
Yeah, and it's that balance of knowing that especially for some jobs that are very metric based and that makes sense. Sure, you want to still monitor those things, but you also want to monitor as you're going along, like, yeah, I'm committing all this to the code base, but also, is this person highly collaborative? Are they solving for the actual root cause problem, or are they just fixing bugs and just patching it and sending it? Like, there's a little bit of a difference there on somebody's maturity in that space and in the role that they're in that shouldn't be, it needs to be captured somehow, and it needs to be recognized, because sometimes that stuff falls to the bottom of the priority list and you lose really, really great people who are the heart of your organization because there's no way to capture the essence of what makes them great, because it's not a check the box of I did X, so I get the next promotion. Like, yeah. I don't know, you potentially miss out on such great people who are doing things that are just a little bit outside of what you can quantify.
Yeah, definitely. So part of what you're talking about, of course, is a learning culture, and learning cultures are very difficult to create. I know because I've been involved in many of them at many different companies. So what are some things that top level managers can do? So, say you have a set of engineers, cloud engineers, and you have a lead in management. What are some top level kind of like C-suite or VP type things? What are some things that they can do to create a learning culture or help enable a learning culture even?
Yes, I love this. So I think one of the things that senior leaders need to do is they need to relentlessly prioritize. You cannot expect people, especially lower in the ranks, especially if you're a massive enterprise organization where, your hierarchy goes 7 management layers deep. You cannot expect to get to the outcomes you're striving towards and to meet your organization's goals if you can't effectively prioritize so that every single level down can give the same message in the same way, but in a way that applies specifically to their part of the organization. So making sure that you're being clear, that your managers are supported and have the clarity that they need. And if they don't, helping them find that clarity. So, your directs of your SVPs or your EVPs or whatever probably have a decent idea. We also have to remember at that level too, they're probably getting some level of bonus tie-in to meeting that organizational goal. So of course they're motivated to ask questions, to do the work, to follow up and follow through. But as you get into that, layer of middle management and frontline management, there's not necessarily a tie-in to their bonus. They're not even getting bonus in some cases. So to them, they're like, I got a job to do. This is on fire. Why do I care about this? Because I got to put out these fires today. It's making sure that you as a senior leader can prioritize. It's making sure that you can give clarity and support for your people as they create that prioritization and clarity. You're standing there side by side with them, making sure that they can create that space for their people to have that time to learn. I think a lot of people don't recognize the fear that folks have is, if I, deprioritize stuff, like let's say I'm doing a report every single month because we've always done it since the dawn of time, but nobody looks at it. I'm not going to stop doing that if I am living paycheck to paycheck and I need to look busy to keep my job. If management all the way down isn't creating the psychological safety to say, one person looks at my report, I can stop doing this or I can automate this, but I'm going to spend that 2 hours a week I do or 4 hours a week learning. Again, if you're not prioritizing it and making sure there's safety for them to do that, they're just going to keep doing it because they're like, but not being busy means people get fired. It means people get laid off. It means I'm out of a job. So you have to create that safety. I think the other biggest thing is you need to lead by example. If you want your whole org to get AWS certified, you better get AWS certified too. Like, you have to understand the pain and the time constraints that you're asking your people to do. And always understanding too, the higher up you are, you have way more flexibility to control your schedule, to clear meetings, to say no to stuff. If even at that level, you still find it hard to find time to study and get certified, you have to understand it's exponentially harder for every person in your organization that's, lower and lower and has less and less autonomy over their job. So I think really thinking clearly about how you as a senior leader can create that clarity, can lead by example, and can ensure that people aren't penalized for taking the time to learn. Those are all kind of really key components to people at those higher levels that they need to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think comes from traditional management that still exists today. I think is the feeling like, could my boss do my job if they had to? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, years ago, it's like people would have some kind of resentment or even resistance if they were like, oh, this person couldn't do my job. There's no way. But, if they're able to show, like, for instance, getting an AWS certification or something like that, it's able to show that, yes, I understand what you're doing. Maybe I can't jump in your seat tomorrow and do your job, but I understand what you're doing and what the problems are and what the pain points are. I think is really important. I think that's one of the things that has been important years ago that's still important today is just having a leader that understands what you do. Maybe they don't know the small exact details, but at least have an understanding, instead of saying, oh, that you sit at a computer all day and I have no idea, but do it better, please.
Yeah. Can't you figure this out like today? Like, can't you deploy that today? No, I cannot. Like, yeah, you have to have that sense of maybe you can't jump in their seat and do it, but do you understand what they go through? Do you understand the pain points? And also, like, are you eliminating those barriers? I think the higher up you get into a leadership role, the more you have to be really effective is taking down barriers to people's success. Like, have you inadvertently created 20 different levels of authorization that need to happen for somebody to push a button? You're wasting time. Is it essential because it's a compliance requirement? Cool, then maybe you have to do it. But if it's not essential and it's just how it's always been, like, rethink those things, especially as a senior leader. Like, you're supposed to shape and drive the strategy and the culture. You have the ability to say, this process is garbage. We need to figure it out and bring the right stakeholders together to reinvent that. The person who is, again, working paycheck to paycheck isn't going to rock the boat if they know that they need that next paycheck to pay the bills. But senior leaders should be in a position to raise the hand and say, I think we could do this better. Can we bring the right people together to make this decision together?
Yeah. And that kind of experimentation, I think, is something that's really taken off in tech. And part of it is because of the DevOps movement, where they say specifically you need to experiment all of the time. But I think it's kind of everywhere that you have to be able to be free to experiment and free to fail, which is really empowering. It's something that I learned years ago, and now I'm living it with the current position I have, to where I can go to my leader and say, I have this wild idea. It may not work, but it's this wild idea. We try it, and knowing that if we try it as a group and it completely fails, that I don't have to fire up my resume and start polishing it. Like, it's a nice feeling to know. And of course that encourages people to do more, when they know that they can fail and it will be okay. I mean, obviously you don't want to fail 10 times in a row, but just knowing that you can fail once in a while and you can have bad ideas or something like that, and it's okay, we pick up and move on, I think is really important for any type of work, really. I mean, not just technical work, but probably any type of work. I think that's a pretty big thing. I guess that comes into the psychological safety part of it, which I am a huge fan of myself also. But how have you seen, like, productivity? How has it traditionally been evaluated, that you've seen, and what ways should we change that now?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it was output based. It was checking the boxes. Did you do the thing? Are you meeting these numbers? Are you doing whatever it is, finishing your compliance trainings on time, whatever that looks like. And again, like, there is a time and place for that. And sometimes that makes a lot of sense based on people's roles. But I think it's also getting beyond that and saying, okay, how can we holistically look at our people and how can we best develop them? Like, I think we saw so much data across, the great resignation and people, or they called it the great reshuffling at some point, is people were leaving because they didn't see opportunities to grow in their current companies. Like, yes, pay was a piece of it, but either first or second to pay was always a lack of development. And I think the thing is, senior leaders often disproportionately believed that they had these really great programs and awesome opportunities and development and growth all over the place. But the problem it wasn't being seen or felt by the people who are deeper in the organization, and that's why they're leaving. So I think part of creating that learning culture is really creating that space of, like, as part of their performance management cycle, are your managers talking to their people about, what development opportunities exist? How do they personally develop? What can they personally do to be better at their role or to be better for another role? And I think that's that space of, middle managers really can be that linchpin for success for people. But I think so often they're kind of in this space where it's like, okay, figure it out. And management, we all know once you get in there, it's kind of lonely in some ways, because suddenly then you can't necessarily talk to, your team, because there's certain things where it's like, that's just not appropriate to cross that line. And you don't necessarily always have the greatest peer support structure, or you don't know if, like, can we talk about this, or can I talk about I'm struggling? If we better enable managers to have the right conversations, to truly develop their people and to customize what that looks like for them, that creates surety for their folks so that they see the development opportunities. It's less about do they exist, but do people believe they exist for them? And that's often the differentiator, because also the thing I've seen, companies will often have really robust development programs, but you technically have to be at a certain level or higher to access them. So to me, your development program is never comprehensive until the person, again, at your front line, your earliest entry point into your organization, sees the same potential for growth that your person who's coming in with 10 years of experience or as a senior leader sees for themselves. Like, we have to be able to better bridge that gap. And that's also that talent mobility thing, is, can you create that pipeline where people who want to be with your organization and want to move up can? Because often there's this missing link between, like, people who want to access that and maybe have some time and capacity. And just there's too much of a gap for people to make it over a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that too, where there's been resistance to those types of things, like, oh, we're not going to offer this to the receptionist because they're not in engineering. And it's like, well, our receptionist talks to our customers every single day. How could that not be valuable, as something to bring in? And that kind of comes into, like, design thinking type things where, you're trying to think from a customer standpoint, where the closest that person is to the customer or the things being used, like, is really valuable. And that's one of the things I think kind of a good shift, I guess a thinking shift is not so much ranking people based on what they do, or making fences around what they do and say, well, this is the only thing they should be responsible or care about. I think breaking those things down makes a big difference, because you get those different insights and different ways of looking at things that are pretty important. I actually worked years ago for a company that's no longer in business. It's Hollywood Video.
Yes.
And so I worked at the corporate office, and I started there as an IT person. I was hired as an IT person, and they said, you need to go answer the phones for like 2 weeks to a month. They had everybody answer the phones. And so I'm like picking up the phone saying, hey, it's Jeremy from Hollywood Video. Oh, I have some late fees and here's a mistake. And I would say, okay, I'll get rid of those for you. And yeah, at first I really questioned it when I first got hired. I'm like, why on earth are they doing this? And then I figured it out once I got into the role. It's like they wanted us to be as close to the problem as possible. And if you're going to write software that's helping these people rent videos, then you need to understand what their pain points are, what their problems are. And I was just blown away by it later. Like, I'm so glad I did that. Yeah, I know that, customers get really upset when they drop off something in a Dropbox and then the next day they get a late fee. They're upset about that. How can we figure out how to use technology to prevent them from having to make that phone call?
Totally. It's so true. Well, and even if you think about, like banking, for example, you've got tellers, you've got your customer service reps on the phones. Your experience with your bank may be significantly different than somebody, again, who's paycheck to paycheck, who's maybe run into some debts or collections and had some problems. But again, those tellers, those call center folks, they know distinctly what those pain points look like. They know exactly what's wrong with your forms or the submission process or how things are processed. And if you're not taking those into account, again, you could end up with a layer of, really smart, sharp software developers that know their stuff, but that their experience is, well, banking is pretty easy. Like this form is super obvious. Like the fields should be really easy. But again, it's like, well, you're approaching it from your lens, from what you've seen as easy and typical. It's like, if you're bringing in people who have that different perspective, again, it helps create a better product, number one. But also I saw a thing, I think it was on McKinsey, where they were talking about, like 70% or something of entry level, like those first line jobs were trying to apply for jobs within their same company for that opportunity to move up and grow. And so many of them aren't making it, again, because there's that gap between coming in at the front line and getting into like that career level job and pathway for yourself. And again, to me, it's like, we're talking about how hard it is to hire tech talent. Why are we not looking in-house to the people who are already committed? They're already showing up day to day. They're possibly in jobs that are kind of a grind, but they're still showing up and they're doing an amazing job. Why don't we give them the opportunity to stay with us, to bring their knowledge up through the ranks, and to make the products and the things that we're doing better?
Yeah, absolutely. What are some creative ways you can think of to possibly break down those barriers? Say if you're in a large enterprise and you're a top level leader, what are some ways that you could possibly enable those types of transitions?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about transitions, I think everyone knows, you've been to places where they've gone really well, and there's also places where they've gone really bad. And all of a sudden there's this massive gap because somebody moved on and everyone's pissed because now everyone's got to do 10 people's worth of work and nobody documented anything. So I think thinking about, number one, just the basic tactical stuff, like, do you have, processes documented? Are you cross-training people so that when somebody leaves, it's a celebration and not a disappointment where, other people can jump in and support that? Also, I think right now that's really relevant in this space is so many organizations are, with the economy as it is, people are laying off, they're reorging, they're changing things up. I understand to a point, but I also don't understand why more companies aren't looking at this from the lens of how do we take advantage of potentially looking at this pool of people that we might need to lay off and saying, how many of them actually have a skill set or the aptitude to learn? And could we spend the time developing them for these roles that we literally can't fill to save our lives? Like, instead of laying people off, could you find a way to qualify the right people and do a 6-month boot camp to train them into junior software engineers? And then when we talk about transition, it's, okay, who in your current engineering population can mentor and support them? So when you've got somebody who's coming in from a different part of the org that doesn't know the drill, that doesn't understand the language, or maybe not the acronyms, and help them along so that they can become successful. Like, do you even have a standard process for bringing someone in who doesn't have, or just onboarding somebody into a new space? Like, yes, HR usually does so much and they get you to, here's the benefits, here's all of that. But what does it look like once you join that engineering team? Is there a process to walk people through, like, here's where our code base is, here's where the data lives, here's where this lives, here's who are experts in this space? Like, so I like things like, assign a buddy. Like, is there somebody who's a buddy who can help new people come in? And to me, it's also not just arbitrarily assigning, because not everyone wants to mentor and support folks. So don't put people in that position. But to me, it's like, if you've got people who are like, I want to be a leader, I want to move up, and maybe you don't have positions for leadership today because you're kind of slowing down on the hiring and promotions, could you give them this opportunity to lead in a way, to develop other people, to show their stuff, so that when you've got that opportunity to hire the next person, they've proven it? Because, I've developed, 12 junior employees into successful software engineers. I've shown I have the leadership ability to coach and train and support. And again, you're also then building, these evangelists and change champions for the work that you're doing, and giving them that opportunity to at least continue to progress, even if that progression doesn't include that title change today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And I really like that idea. And it kind of resonates with me because I had that happen in my career where I was told, you're going to be laid off on this date. We're cutting this whole team, and I was a software developer, and without getting too technical, there was another software developer position open, but I had no idea anything about that technology. And I told my leader, when he approached me, I said, I've never touched it. I don't know the first thing about it. And what he did was gave me permission to be terrible at it for a while. He's like,
Yes.
well, if you want to stay with us and you want to try to learn this, we'll give you a few months to get kind of ramped up and be terrible at it. And I did, and I was terrible at it, and I got better. And then I fell into that position and ended up sticking with that technology to this day. Actually, I'm still involved in it. But that is one of those things that, like you mentioned, you can be laying off a set of people because you don't have the resources for that, or the company's not doing that, or whatever. But you're also going to have those positions. It's like, we've had a hard time filling this. So, what is worse, interviewing people for 6 months or letting somebody sit there for 6 months and learn it? Somebody that we already know, like you said, shows up every day. We know they're a friendly person, etc. We'll give them a few months to figure this out, or we can interview people for the next few months and see what we get. I think that's a definite different way of looking at it, for sure.
Well, and like, imagine the brand loyalty that you build with people if you offer them that option. Some people are just going to be like, peace, like, I don't want that, I'm out, and that's fine. But there's people who, they don't want to be laid off. They want to stay with the company. They love it there. They want to be a part of this. And if you give them that opportunity and they can be successful and they're able to stay, they're going to be the people running around the streets without anything, saying, you need to come work here. Look what they did for me. Look what the opportunity I had. And for some people, it's potentially life-changing money. Like, I know money isn't everything for everyone, but also it's that space of like, if you're working in a job that's now being automated away or that's being offshored, but you get this chance, 6 months, you've got to prove yourself. You've got to work hard. You've got to show up for this boot camp. And suddenly you can go from, an hourly, a very volatile job that may or may not be there in a year to something that's got career stability, because again, it's software engineering, it's cybersecurity, it's these really critical places. That loyalty and support you're going to have from that person, that champion that you're going to build, you can't buy that on the market. And they're going to come in and again, it creates that talent mobility. Like, you've now created a rung of a ladder where other people can come in as junior employees, build their career with you, and have those opportunities to progress. There's always stuff in everybody's job where they're like, could I pay somebody a little less and form a different position? Yeah, like if you talk to your software engineers and other people, your product managers, there's probably a number of tasks that you can pull together to say, here's your proving ground. Here's where you get to be terrible at this thing. Well, you learn these skills and you can build a career with us. Like, I just love the potential you have to both be compassionate about the current market and to give people that chance that they may not otherwise be able to access. Not everyone can afford a 6-month, 9-month boot camp, working full time with kids at home or whatever. But I don't know. I just think about the possibilities if companies could think about just doing it a little bit different. What have you got to lose? You already can't hire these roles.
Yeah.
And also, I think too, the other thing is most companies don't have a good way of quantifying skills, like you said, outside of people's jobs. So for a receptionist, they can answer phones, they can greet customers, they can do this. You have no idea most of the time that this person is not also on the side learning C#, learning Java, or maybe has this background in something that's highly related, but not completely within the bounds of their current job. Like, you could literally be letting people go who have a background in program management, product management. But are we digging in? Sometimes sometimes it's hard, but also there's so much room to still have humanity in this space, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And that is something that's kind of hard to bring up sometimes if you don't talk with people and ask them, like, maybe your receptionist, like you said, is writing C# every day and they've built this wild piece of software and they're really excited and really passionate about, but you have no idea. And you're, could you please post this job posting for C# developer? We're still looking, like, if you don't communicate with people enough, then yeah, that does create a little bit of a gap. And I really like what you said about creating brand loyalty, especially because, so if you move a person from, like I said, an hourly job that they didn't really like, but they worked really hard at, and then, a few years later, well, now they're a Cisco certified engineer. They're going to be getting messages on LinkedIn for sure,
Yes.
every single day, like, hey, come work for us, and that brand loyalty, like you said, will make them say, you know what, no, this organization did a lot of great things for me. They put me where I'm at. I'm good, as opposed to maybe getting all these messages and saying, okay, cool, I'm out. Of course, some people will do that, but a lot of people, when they feel like an organization has helped them and they feel like their leadership is cared, people don't generally leave companies, they leave managers, as they say. So
Yes.
they feel like they're being taken care of, and and that their manager actually cares about their success, and they're a lot more likely to ignore those LinkedIn messages that I think we all get in 2022.
Well, and the danger is if you don't train people, you'll always constantly have a deficit in the skills in your organization. You'll never be able to keep up. And I think the other thing too is like, when you're thinking about helping people and helping them grow and learn, it's like that loyalty, that commitment to you. It's like, yeah, they might not stay there forever, but they're going to stay today. And also, like, so many companies are like, we need a competitive advantage. We need to be able to differentiate ourselves. How much better would it be, especially knowing that a lot of technical people were leaving because they're like, I have no room for growth, I have no development. If you could say, we have a program that helps reskill people who were at risk of being laid off or who were in a pool of people getting laid off, and we have an internal program, we've built it, from the ground up, this is what that looks like. Like, people want to know that those opportunities exist and are actually real. And if you can show evidence of that because you've done it, those are the things that give you that competitive advantage, where other people are going to go, hey, like, that's kind of cool. It's like every company right now is going to tell you, we have training opportunities. What does that mean? Doesn't necessarily translate into growth, into salary increases, all of the things people are looking for. But if you have tangible evidence that you're doing what you're saying, that makes a difference for people, and that differentiates you in its really tight market.
Yeah, definitely. And those things are tricky to put together for sure. Like I said, it's something that I've done in the past. However, it's not extremely expensive to put those types of things together, as far as just creating a plan and saying, this is the plan that we want, this is where we want our people to be, and this is how we're going to measure it. And it could be something as simple as, we would like it if you'd take one course a quarter or read one book a quarter or something like that. And it's not necessarily like, I want you to be certified for SQL at the end of the quarter, but how about if you read a book on it and do a presentation on what you learned from that book, or something like that. It is pretty relatively low cost to say, here's a plan that we'll put in place. And it's nice to have big fancy software systems and whole staff of folks to train people, but in most cases that's not really possible. But you can definitely create plans and say, this is what we'd like to see, and have people participate. And even the book club, I've done the book club thing for 10 years or so. I'm thinking of bringing it up with our team now, actually. But the good old-fashioned book club works great, to where you say, each person takes a chapter of this book. We're all going to read our chapter and then do a small presentation on it in a month. And then it feels like you've read the whole book, right? When you give your presentation on your chapter, then you see everyone else's presentations and things like that. And that's small, and it costs, you have to buy a book for each person on the team. It's not a huge expense. Something like that, or even a Pluralsight course, like each of you take one course on this one thing and talk about it.
Yeah, and it's so easy. I think the thing here is, like, there's additional benefits that aren't quantifiable. So book club, or we used to do article discussions at my last job. So instead of reading a whole book, you read, an article from, Harvard Business Review or whatever, and you meet and discuss the article. Like, anybody can read an article, it's maybe 10 minutes of your time if it's a really long one. Or I've seen people now doing podcasts. So they'll listen to a podcast and discuss that, maybe it's a 15-minute, maybe it's 45 minutes, but they then discuss that. The benefits that people don't realize that are harder to quantify is your ability to meet new people that you may not have ever interacted with before, to gain perspectives from people outside of your general circle that you're in. So it's like, yes, like, do it as a team, especially in these fully remote or hybrid environments, to continue to build that camaraderie within your team, but find ways to do that as a bigger organization. And again, also, it's that leadership by example. Who doesn't want to do book club with the CIO to get that face time? Like, if that's really important to you, you're going to read the book and you're going to show up. The CIO gets that perspective of all these other employees. They get the opportunity to meet people that they might not otherwise interact with. And people are always saying, like, we need people to think strategically. We need people to think about upstream, downstream impact of their work. It's like, well, if you never expose them to that, how are they supposed to get there? But giving them these opportunities where you can build connection, build that sense of belonging for people. Again, it's almost impossible potentially to qualify something like belonging, but giving people those opportunities to find where they fit and to find where they connect. It's like in Pluralsight here, we have our Slack channels where it's like, there's a mental health Slack channel, there's, an art channel, like you can find like your people, so to speak, and, build that sense of support for yourself. I also think if we're like just talking dollars and cents, are you going to continue to overpay for talent that's got 20 years of experience because it's all you can find? Or are you going to create ways to move people up, to pay them at a level that's commensurate with their current experience and give them opportunities to grow and to grow alongside with your organization? Like, the choice is yours. Like, you can buy one person or, for a ridiculous amount of money, or maybe you can retain 3 people who are, again, going to build the future of your business because they're bringing a different level of insights for the same cost.
Yeah. And I mean, that is always one of the unfortunate realities of any organization, is it does come down to dollars and cents a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And so kind of the older traditional way of thinking is, we can't afford that. And in some cases, with the way that business moves now, it's like, well, now you can't afford to not do that. So yeah, it's very, very cool. And we've talked a little bit about psychological safety a few times here. What does that mean to you? Like, what does psychological safety mean to you?
Yeah, it's that ability, that safety to be able to either bring up things, to ask questions, to propose new ideas, but without the fear of being ashamed or humiliated or embarrassed, or nobody wants to have their boss be angry with them because they brought up an idea, or, you contradicted someone, so like now you're in trouble. Like, psychological safety to me, there's almost like a couple of levels of it. So like at bare minimum, it's that generally acceptable workplace behavior. So like, are people generally respectful? Are you not playing favorites with folks or causing drama? Like, are you addressing conflicts as they come up? That's kind of like level 1 psychological safety. Like, can people be treated like reasonable human beings? I think the deeper thing where people who are doing this really well and really successful are when you have leaders who can look beyond that and say, okay, I need to understand and account for the things that, my unconscious bias, my perspective on the world, like, are people able to say what they need to say and want to say without fear of retaliation? Like, do you personally have a different reaction when a woman questions you than when a man questions you? Does senior leadership seem to ignore concerns from frontline employees, but loves the same suggestions from a senior level leader? There's so many ways that, you can be a little bit biased in these discussions, in these spaces. And I think we also have to acknowledge psychological safety can exist for a giant chunk of your organization, but not for another. So we have to be really careful, especially as senior leaders, is you could look at your survey data and be like, look, people are happy, they're feeling good, they're feeling like they can speak up. But if your organization has a dominant majority where of course they feel psychologically safe because everyone is like them and everyone's got the same background and they're all looking out for each other. If you're looking at your data and saying, well, look, 80% of people think we're great, but 80% of your people are all the same, you don't have psychological safety. You have to be able to account for every person, all of the different facets of diversity. Does everyone feel like they have equal opportunity to speak up and be heard for what they can bring to the table? And no one is perfect. Nobody is perfect out the gate. And we all have biases that we can work to, overcome. But like, are people making that effort? Or is management looking at it and going, well, 80% is happy, so the rest of you should just get along? Like, that's a big thing to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things I think is probably the biggest part of psychological safety that you just brought up, that kind of got the gears spinning in my head, is bias and how much that affects psychological safety. And as soon as you say that, I'm like picturing groups I've worked with in the past that are like, oh, of course this group of people always was able to share any idea they had because they were all buddies and they all went golfing on Saturdays, and they,
Yes, totally. Well, and it's like, it's not just the overt behaviors and the things that people say. It's little things like, do you permit as a leader or as a team, as people, do you permit people to eye roll and do that thing when somebody says, my pronouns are they, them. I'd appreciate if you use those pronouns. Like, do you allow people to eye roll or to make snarky comments? Do you allow somebody to be like, well, Asians don't belong in leadership positions because they're doers, not, leaders. Like, do you allow those types of discriminatory remarks to be made, even if they're just between you and one other person? Or I've worked places where they're like, yeah, but she's pregnant. Like, do we have to hire her? It's like, number one, that's like a huge problem. But also, like, do you allow that for other things where it's like, yeah, but I don't like her. Like, she's abrasive. When, again, same thing, like the man could say the same thing the same way. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, but that guy's a leader. He's assertive. He's a go-getter. Like, do you just permit these behaviors that make it not psychologically safe for different groups of folks? Like,
yeah, and those things really matter because, they might seem like a small thing, but they're not a small thing to that person. And, it makes them feel a little bit detached. And then after time goes on, more and more of these things, they're eventually feel like I'm not a part of the group. So why should I give it my best? And why should I care? Oh, things are going to fail. No, I'm not really a part of the group. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. One of the things that we say in the fire service, because I'm a volunteer firefighter, and they always say it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. And so you can't jump up and say we are an organization that discourages bias and sexism and racism, and then when someone rolls their eyes and like you said, they don't do anything about it, then it's like, okay, you're preaching and you're also allowing it to happen, and stopping it in the first place, just not tolerating it is the first step to where you can say, look, this isn't acceptable. You can't do that here. And it always starts with the small things, but yeah, it pretty much comes down to, what do you tolerate? If you set a really high bar and say, this is what we'll tolerate and this is what we won't, and you stick to it, then everyone has the right expectations. Everyone knows what to expect. And if they're the type of person who wants to roll their eyes and make snide comments, then they know they can do it somewhere else.
Yep.
Pretty much. But yeah, that's
true.
Very cool. So it looks like we're getting kind of close to the end time. I was wondering if there's any questions from anybody watching that they would like to share, and I do see some here.
Yeah, I think we might have an anonymous question.
Yes, we do have an anonymous question. It says, hi, Heather. I'm a visible minority in the tech space who struggles a lot with imposter syndrome, feeling like I'm not as good as my white colleagues and force myself to do more in order to stay under the radar to not raise doubt. Any advice on combating this insecurity?
I love this question because I think, honestly, there's two parts to this answer. Part of it is like, all of us feel that sense of, I'm not good enough. I could be better. I could be doing something else. I think the danger, especially in workplaces, and when we put all the onus on, especially people who are minorities or people from diverse backgrounds, English language learners, people with different abilities, if we put all of the onus on combating that on those folks, we're not actually doing anything to actually address the problem. I think part of this is like, are we enabling, again, managers to actually have really good conversations, to call out when people are doing a great job, to highlight the things that people are doing well? I think so often well-meaning managers are like, you're doing great. And then they're like, goodbye. And you're like, great at what? Like, what does that mean? Like, does that translate into I make my bonus? Do I get a raise? Am I qualifying for the next thing? And then people are shocked, like when they don't get the next promotion, but it's like, well, you've been telling me I'm great for months, and then I apply for this and I don't get it. It's like, I'm getting mixed messages. It's like, can we help leaders be more clear in giving both that, constructive feedback to help people grow, but also that positive feedback? When you're doing a good job, call it out, call out the specific behaviors and the things that people are doing right. Because the more that they hear that from their peers and their leadership, the more they can then start to self-select into, okay, I can let go of some of that imposter syndrome. I'm not terrible at my job. I have actual visible evidence that I'm doing good things. So I think it's that combination of like, how can we as peers and leaders make sure that we're celebrating that, but also making sure, like, if somebody needs coaching, don't wait around to coach them. Help them be their best and be really meaningful and specific. It can't just be like, you're doing terrible, suck it up and get it together. It's like, no, it needs to be, hey, I've noticed on a couple of your calls, you're saying this too much, or you're saying that too much. Here's a way that I think we could talk about it that's going to help your talk track. Or, I've seen that, you've had a number of, pieces of code get rejected for whatever reason. Are you struggling here? Do you have any questions? Can I help you with this? Because, I'm seeing a pattern and I'd like to help you address it. I think too often it's easy to be like, well, I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, so I'm just not going to say anything. But then that also doesn't give people a chance to grow and to really be great at what they do. And you as a leader don't have that opportunity to get better at coaching and supporting people. So I don't know that that fully answers the question. I think part of it is you, especially as somebody who is a visible minority, is owning the greatness that you bring to the table, like just the different experiences you have, just the different way you approach things and look at the world. That's super valuable on its own. And I get that we don't pay people to be great at seeing things from a different perspective, but that matters so much. And it's something that, you've made it here. Somebody took a chance on you. They hired you. Like, you are here. They believe in you on some level. People believe on you. And I had somebody tell me this. They're like, if I didn't believe in you, I wouldn't have hired you. So at some level, you've got to start to understand, how do I let some of this go and know that I belong here just as much as the next person?
Yeah, one thing that my wife shared with me the other day that I thought was really interesting is she was talking about imposter syndrome, and I was sharing with her, I feel the same things. And she said that when she was discussing things with her coach, she said, I think I have these shortcomings in these areas. And her coach just answered back and said, what evidence do you have of that? And it was just very direct. And she was like, as soon as she asked me that, what evidence do I have? It's all in my head, basically was her answer. And so the coach kept saying, what evidence do you have of that? And that's something that you should ask yourself when you start to feel these doubts and things like that, is ask yourself, what evidence do I have of that? Well, if you don't have any real evidence that that's a thing, then maybe it's just, something that you got to work out with yourself. And it's like I told her, I go through imposter syndrome all the time. I've been doing this a long time. And there's times that, so I started doing that same thing. I'm like, I'm really terrible at this. And then I'm like, what really evidence do I have that I'm that terrible? So.
Well, and it's true. And I think what I found as I've kind of moved up in different organizations is even people who are VPs and EVPs and C-suite, they have imposter syndrome too, because the higher you go up in an organization, the more visible your mistakes are, the more visible you are, the more you're harshly judged for not doing or saying the right thing. So it doesn't matter whether you're the first person fresh out of college that's the newest in your organization, or the person who's an industry vet who's been in here for 45 years, we're all suffering from a different level of this. So no, it's universal. Everybody's got it to some extent. And that's really hard to overcome. I think the other thing too, is I tell people, number one, track your wins. That way, when you feel down and you have a bad day, you can literally read through and be like, oh, I got kudos from my peer. I got this award. Somebody said, thank you so much for going above and beyond. I literally will copy paste what people have said when I've done a good job, so that when I have those really bad days where I'm like, I suck, I'm terrible, I should just quit, I don't belong here, I look at that and go, okay, there's my evidence. Calm down for a minute. Maybe I need to step away. But I also encourage people. So when I try to do this on the regular, when you give people kudos, if you have an opportunity, and again, it's psychologically safe to do so, copy in somebody's manager, copy in the people who are above them 2 levels, make sure, or sometimes I will even send the stuff direct to somebody's manager and say, I want to let you know that this person's behavior is in alignment with our values. They're doing the right things. And you as a manager of them need to know that, because sometimes it's so valuable to make sure yeah, it's cool when my peer's like, hey, you did a great job. It's really cool when all of a sudden you know that your boss knows that you did a great job. And especially as a person in a position of power and authority, if you're an SVP and somebody, 3 levels down did something really awesome, you need to make sure everybody's manager knows about that. Don't let those opportunities pass by. Just to acknowledge people's contributions. It's so simple and so basic, but also do it in a way that matters to people. Some people love the public, shout me out in all hands or whatever, in your town hall meeting. Some people just want that 2-line email from somebody who's really influential to them saying thanks for doing that. So knowing your people well enough to know what matters to them and what lights them up. And again, that's part of building that loyalty and support for your organization. When they know that you see them for who they are and how they want to be recognized, that matters to people.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's something that's small and easy to do.
It's free. Absolutely free.
Yeah.
And nobody can Nobody is not going to get, nobody's going to get sick of hearing that they're doing good things when you're meaningful and specific about it. Like nobody wants to just be heard all the time. You're great. You're great. You're like, okay, whatever that means. But when you give people clear and specific feedback, I don't know any person who doesn't just love to know that like I matter, I make a difference, that I made somebody's day. Like I don't even have to be curing cancer or changing the world, but like to know that you matter to someone else. Sometimes that's the difference between having a day where you just feel like you've got to call it quits on everything and having a day where you feel like, okay, it stinks, but I can push on because somebody else cares and needs me to be here with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have one more question here. Thanks so much for sharing your ideas and expertise, Heather. Do you have any true stories you can share about workforce transformation initiatives that you helped customers implement? I'm looking for the, what does this look like in the real world?
I love this. So I think when we're thinking about both talent mobility and really like, what does workforce transformation look like? The places where I'm seeing this be the most successful are the ones who are not doing this in a silo. They're understanding that they need to bring in all the right partners. So when you're talking about transformation as a whole, by nature, that's an evolution. That's a long-term initiative. I'm not going to deliver you results in a month. That's impossible. And it's not going to be valuable either. Like maybe I can generate some data for you by doing a program or whatever. But the thing with transformation is like, you've got to not only change what is, but then you've got to continue to shape that path for people going forward. So one of the things where we're seeing this work is people who are willing to bring together, HR, L&D, your comms people, your executive leadership, your middle managers, like when everyone gets a seat at the table to co-create what this looks like going forward, number one, you develop a better product because it's informed not just by what I see or what you see, but by what everyone on the team sees. It also enables that buy-in. Like if people know that they contributed and they were part of this, they're so much more likely to like support it once it rolls out than if they feel this is one more top-down initiative that's just being handed down by somebody who doesn't get it. And I think part of it is also, even when you roll out, you need to listen to people's feedback. You need to collect it in multiple ways, like whether it's a listening session, surveys, whatever, but you need to answer it. So I think that's one of the things that not everyone does well is you have that feedback loop, but you never close it. People need to hear, even if the answer is, that's a good idea, it's not part of phase one, or it's not on the roadmap at all. People need to know that they were heard and acknowledged, or they're going to assume that you don't care and you're not acknowledging them. So making sure along the way, I think that's another piece that people are building in. I think the other kind of space of the true stories of things that are working is organizations that are not just trying to blanket solve like for everybody and anything. Like I think with Pluralsight in particular, we have so much content. You could easily just be like, let's build a 1,000,003, channels and throw them out there and hope that it works. The people who are being successful are saying, what is the problem I'm trying to solve for this group of people? What content do I need to drive them to that's going to make them better at their job? And they're solving specifically for that. And they're acknowledging what are the support systems that need to surround that, because a learning platform is only going to take you so far. But again, if you don't have good management support, if there's not, peer-to-peer support, if there's not opportunities, like it's that space. Education is a piece of the puzzle. Your experience and your exposure to leadership and to other ideas and to the relationships you're building, those are the other components that need to be balanced with learning in order for you to be effective and successful long-term. Those are just some of my ideas, things that are working.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think we're at the hour and we need to wrap it up. Is there any final thoughts that you wanted to share with the viewers today?
I think the thing that I would say is, be open to new possibilities, be open to doing things differently. I don't think we're at a place where there's a return to normal. Like, I just don't think that's possible. I think it's a time to step out and say, okay, let's reset. Let's take the time to think through, where do we want to go in the next 1 to 5 years, and start to make plans to help you get there. Start to open up those doors of possibility, to get the feedback, and to also commit. This is a long-term change. You're talking about upending how people do business, potentially. You've got to start and be willing to stick with this for the long haul, and know that there are people like me and other organizations, you can consult with folks to help drive your strategy and drive, where are you going? Like, yes, I get that not everyone wants to pay for a high price consultant or whatever, but sometimes you just need a little bit of that structure to say, here's the path forward. Here's how we can help you overcome the typical hurdles that you'll face if you do it on your own. And knowing that it's okay to ask for help, knowing it's okay to say, I don't think this is working. We need to start from scratch, or we just need to retool what we have to make it work. A lot of companies have great ideas. It's maybe just failing somewhere in execution, where maybe just a little bit of a pivot could make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you very much.